Hey, Traffic Think Tank, Ian Howells here today to discuss promotions and compensation adjustments. Now, this process isn't identical from one organization to the next, and outside of the very broad advice of you need to be doing as best as you can in your role to position yourself to get a promotion or a comp increase, what I really wanted to talk about today is the rough process. And again, it's not going to be identical for your organization, but based on the several places I've worked and managed teams and chatting with other folks, this is generally what's happening across organizations with some deviations here and there. And then really to discuss a couple things that I wish I could have talked about with my team when I was managing marketing groups within organizations. That may have been just my failing. It may have been because the organization, let's say, strongly discouraged talking about certain things with folks below the director level or whatever level it might be. But either way, there are some things I imagine your manager wishes they could tell you about the way the process works that they can't really, right? So my goal today is to talk about a couple of those. But let's start with the process, right? So with performance reviews, that's really the kickoff generally, right? If you're going to get a promotion or going to get a comp bump, it probably aligns with performance review time. Some organizations don't do comp adjustments at all outside of the full year performance reviews and then maybe mid-year check-ins. Some places really try and keep it to that full year review and very rarely do a comp adjustment at a mid-year check-in, sometimes mandating that it has to be tied into a promotion, right? Basically, you have to be taking over somebody else's job, or there has to be such a strong need for a new role that it ends up getting created mid-year, and you end up getting bumped into that, right? But sometimes it can only literally happen in January, February, March, right? Usually the start of the year is when this tends to kick off. Within performance reviews, there's a few different things that I'll touch on briefly. Most organizations have some form of self-assessment, right? You have to grade yourself based on the goals that you were given and what was accomplished over the last 6 months or 12 months. Some organizations also do 360s, which is getting feedback from other folks at your level, maybe one or two people a level below and one or two people a level above, right? So the idea is to get a broader scope of feedback so that it's not just, here's what I say about myself, and then here's what my manager says about me, and that's it, right? Getting that kind of wider view of what other people think it's like to work with you, and that can be very helpful for your manager in terms of putting your review together. And then you'll have your actual performance review with your direct supervisor, generally one-on-one. I know some organizations have your manager and then their manager as well, so 2 levels up in on the process as well, but generally it'll be you and your direct supervisor. Now, one of the main splits is whether your organization does promotions and comp in the performance review, right? Or if they do it after the fact. More and more organizations, from what I can tell, are moving to separating the two. The thinking behind this, generally from HR, the talent planning group, is that people are paying more attention to feedback if they're not just sitting there waiting to hear if they're getting a promotion or a comp adjustment, right? That you're paying closer attention and you're actually receiving the feedback better if it's not going to immediately be overshadowed by the next thing we're going to talk about, being promotions and comp. So some like to split the process in two, and others, everything will happen at the same time. You'll sit down, you'll get your review, and then the review will basically culminate in whether you get a title bump or not, and whether your comp is changing or not. But either way, these next few bullets, this is really what's happening in the background, right? It's either happening in between that performance review and then the comp discussion, or it's kind of been happening in the background probably while you were doing your self-assessment and 360s on other folks in the organization. So the first biggie here that I think lots of folks don't really have a great understanding of or appreciation for what goes on is the calibration meetings, right? And I've sat through many of these. Sometimes they are very long and painful, sometimes they're fun. Really depends on how big the group is and how long these things end up taking. But a calibration meeting, for example, would be the leadership of marketing within an organization. So the person in charge of SEO and paid search and email and display and native and whatever else, the CMO or the senior director of marketing, whoever the highest person in the marketing team is, their direct reports, the channel leads, and then somebody from HR and talent planning. And effectively, you'll sit in a room and you'll give the 2-minute overview of everybody on your team, and then listen to all of the other channel leads and managers give the 2-minute overview for everybody on their team. It's basically the way for the head of marketing to get all of their direct reports into one room and to hear about everybody in the marketing organization. And I imagine this runs fairly similarly outside of marketing, right? The dev group may have something very similar for their annual review cycle as well. And so the hope or the idea is that then all of the leadership of marketing has a decent idea of the rest of the group, right? So that if I run the SEO team, I don't just know who the great performers are within my SEO group. I also have a pretty good handle on who are our best paid search performers, who are the standouts on the email team, right? Who is just blowing by expectations in the native ads team, right? Knowing that is really beneficial because there's a lot of cross-channel movement inside marketing teams, right? Especially for folks that are in the first couple of years of their career, they may not have settled on a channel yet. I think it's pretty rare to, take your first role in marketing and just fall in love with that channel and decide this is my thing and this is the channel I'm going to stick with, for the entirety of my career. I don't have any interest in learning another channel or maybe working on another channel for a period of time. So it's good to know kind of who those standout performers are. And so in the calibration sessions, several of the places that I have worked off of what's called a 9-box, right? Which is basically a 3x3 grid with current performance and potential being the axes, because words. And effectively then you get placed literally into a box, which is weird, but happens. And the best one you can be in is high performance, high potential, which means you are crushing your current role. And it is clear that you are going to be able to take on more. Like you are ready for the next step, right? If you're in the high performance, high potential box, you are probably getting a promotion, right? It's fairly difficult to get one without being in that quadrant. But if you're a high perform, high potential, the discussion is pretty quickly going to turn to, okay, what's the next step for this person? Are we ready to promote them? Do we have a new role for them? Do we have more responsibility for them? Because if we don't, they're probably going to get bored. So we need to make sure that we keep this person engaged and challenged. If you're on the other end, low performance, low potential, very different discussion. The questions are going to be around, do we have this person on a performance plan? Are we managing them out? Can it be salvaged? Would they do a good job on another team? Is there something about this channel specifically that doesn't work? Right? Not exactly the discussion that you want to have, right? And I think the biggest knock on folks in this bucket is really that potential, right? You can be a low performer because something about this channel just isn't clicking, right? Like this just maybe isn't your specific team that you should be on, right? Maybe email marketing just isn't for you for one reason or another. But it's that low potential that's really the anchor tied to your feet, right? That's the thing that really makes things go south very fast, is if your behavior and your perceived interest and effort makes it clear to folks within the leadership level that you don't have a high degree of potential, you can't do better than you're doing now, that's really what'll sink, not a career, but sink potential at an individual organization, right? Because shaking that stigma after the fact, very, very difficult. So in the calibration session, you may literally be put into a box if they run off the 9-box framework, which again seems strange, but that's happening, right? So it's good to recognize that to a degree, it's a competition, right? Because literally your whole group is going to be put into this scatter chart, and your name is going to be up there on the board with other folks. And are you in the good boxes, or are you in the we need to talk about performance improvement plan boxes, or are you just kind of in the middle where good performance now, well suited to the current role, unlikely that we have a title bump or more responsibility coming, maybe a small cost of living adjustment or something like that, unlikely to have big comp movement this time around, that kind of meaty middle. So the next step, at least in my experience, then is budgeting, right? And again, this will either happen right before or in between that kind of performance review cycle where the review is actually delivered and comp adjustments. Budgeting, I think, is the thing that folks early in their career have the most blindness around, right? Not knowing how this happens, because organizations generally don't discuss it, right? But what I can say is multiple places that I've worked effectively work like this. You run a team and you are just given a number one day. It could be in a system, it could be in a quick one-on-one with your boss where they just give you a number, or it could be through email, right, where you get a password protected Excel doc and your name is in one of the rows and you have a budget. And that budget is the total amount that you can give out to your direct reports, or multiple levels down if you manage multiple levels of individual contributors. And that's the pie. And your job is to do the next step, which is allocation, right? So you get your budget, and pending the organization, you may have one number, you may have 3 numbers, right? So in places that I've worked in the past, you would get 3 numbers. Base comp bucket. So, okay, you get 40 grand to divvy up to your team in base comp. A bonus bucket. So based on the bonus plan that we have established, the performance of the organization, and your channel's performance, you have X dollars to distribute in bonuses. And then stock, if it's a publicly traded company, or profit sharing, even potentially if it's not. So you have X number of RSUs that you can distribute to your group, as an example, right? So you have a very set budget that you then work backward from. And it's not impossible to get budget increased, but it is very, very, very rare, right? Because effectively, the board of the organization has approved a certain amount, right? There is a cost plan for the next fiscal year, right? Usually this is why it's happening at the beginning of the year. The board has already approved how much the company can spend next year, right? And a certain amount of that is on its people, right? There's a budget set for full-time or part-time or contractors and so on and so on and so on. And so when you're given your budget, me, for example, as the lead of the SEO team, the same thing's happening with the person in charge of paid search and email and native and design and dev and HR, right? Everybody is given their budget, and those all ladder up to being less than or equal to the total board approved comp plan for the year, right? There is a number that you're working backward from. Money is not infinite. You are effectively always laddering up to a larger goal, and everything is mostly zero sum. Because again, if you argue for more successfully and get more in your budget, that means one of 2 things happened. It came from someone else's, or, 3 things. there was intentionally some money held back to account for the possibility that somebody makes a very compelling case for more budget, or we had already been at the cap as an organization, and the case was so compelling that the CMO went back to the CEO and the president and the board and got approval to spend more money. Number three is very, very, very unlikely, right? So what tends to happen is if you go press for more money, you're either betting on the fact that there's a little bit held back that you're trying to get some of, or you're literally going to try and take money out of another channel or another team's budget to get more budget into yours, right? And some people feel like that's fine. Some people would be very morally opposed to knowingly taking money out of somebody else's pocket to put it in the pocket of your team. Personal preference, I guess. So budgeting, I think, as I said, is the part that folks early or early-ish into their career don't have a lot of exposure to, because there will only be a few dozen people in the organization that are involved in this process. Generally, you're running a decently sized group if you're in these discussions. So then the next step is allocation, which then your direct manager or the person who runs a marketing channel, as an example, has to take that budget and divvy it up, right? So I would get my budget, and then I would have to look across my group, and then I would go to my first level of managers and say, okay, here's your total budget, right? And that covers the people under you. You need to then split that up, and then I've got to approve that, right? And then that comes off of my line item. And then everybody that reports directly to me, I have to allocate out who's going to get what, right? So if I have a few star performers and then a handful of consistent performers, and then hopefully very few, if any, weak performers, I effectively have to split the funding out across those groups, and all sorts of stuff goes into these decisions, right? Like, one, the reviews and the ratings, right? Like how are people doing? How are people performing? Retention is a biggie, right? Sometimes somebody may get more RSUs because retention is actually what we're trying to go for here. So maybe bonus may not be huge, right? I may go a little light in the bonus bucket and give myself more bonus to apply to folks that are more junior, because a lower amount is going to be more meaningful for them, right? So I can kind of get more bang for my buck out of that bonus dollar spent, and load up my really high performers with RSUs because they vest over 36 months, and the interest from an organizational standpoint is keeping this person on the team, right? And keeping them at least within the organization, right? So that they don't leave and go to a competitor or something like that. So the allocation process is often, I think, the most stressful part for managers, right? Because you're trying to weigh all of these different things, short-term rewards versus retention-based rewards like stock or RSUs, along with, I'm sure, never feeling like you have enough budget to go around, right? Most managers would probably always take more money to divvy up to their team members, right? As long as you like your team and you don't actively dislike the folks that are working for you. And then next step being approval. You have to divvy your budget up and then submit it for approval. Not a whole lot to discuss here, except, in those instances where folks kind of get a little aggressive and distribute 105% of what they were supposed to, then that approval process can get kind of sticky, because you're going to need very strong defense for every time you went over. The other thing that will sometimes get flagged in approval process is some organizations have windows that you're supposed to stay within, right? So if you're on a 1 to 5 rating scale and 3 is meets expectations, there may very well be rules in place, and if this is all submitted in software in a web-based system, it may not even let you submit outside of these boundaries, where you cannot give more than a 6% comp adjustment to base salary for someone who is getting a meets expectation, right? Sometimes comp adjustment and rating are directly tied together, where you are not allowed to over reward somebody who's getting a meets expectation, right? Or if you gave somebody a 4, they should be getting at least a Y% base comp adjustment, right? There's a top and bottom to the window generally. That may happen as well, right? And if you're outside of those bounds, if the system allows you to submit it, that may be a thing that then triggers a deeper discussion in the approval process for comp changes. And then lastly is then the communication. And again, this may happen in that performance review meeting, or it may be a separate meeting after the fact. I think the biggest thing I would say here is for individual contributors and really for everybody, right? Because even managers get, their own review and their own comp meeting. But generally managers have a better understanding of how this is working. By the time you get to that meeting where you're told, okay, you're getting a 2.5% base comp increase and a X dollar, towards your bonus potential for the year and Y number of RSUs or something like that. If you're unsatisfied with that comp change, it is very unlikely that you can do anything about it now, right? By the time you get to that meeting, all of this stuff has already happened, right? I, as the leader of the SEO team, using that example again, I've already done my allocation. It's already been approved, and now I'm starting my communication meetings. So if you want more money, you are in effect asking me to take it from the people that I have not had the comp meetings with yet, right? Because this late in the process, I am not going to get approval to up my budget. It's just not going to happen, right? The only thing I could potentially do, and HR is not going to be happy, and I'm sure my boss is not going to be happy, and it's going to be sticky, but the most likely or the most possible outcome is I go back, I look at the meetings I haven't had yet. So who have I not communicated their comp changes to? And I literally take money away from them to give it to you, right? That is effectively what you're asking if you push for additional comp after this communication has already happened, right? And again, more commonly at mid to large size organizations where things are very, very formal and structured. You don't have to be happy with your comp adjustment, right? Everybody wants to make more money, but I would pause and strongly consider your next move before pushing for additional comp right there. Just understanding what it means, understanding that we are effectively working in a zero-sum system, most likely, and you asking for more money does mean you are asking your boss to give someone else less in order to give you more. And again, maybe you're fine with that and you don't care. Maybe, you can look around your team and you feel like that guy is a drain. Like, you could take money from him and give it to me. Some people have that attitude. Many people don't. But I would just be aware that that may actually be what you're asking to have happen, right? Which I think segues nicely into the big thing that I think people miss, and that as managers we tend to not talk about because it's not good for morale and it's not really an attitude that you want to foster, but it's true. It's a competition. Promotions and comp adjustments are zero sum, right? If I manage a team of 8, I can't put a request in to promote 8 people. I'm going to get laughed out of the building, right? Now, some companies do follow the very aggressive Jack Welch rank and yank, right? Where your team, your review of your team has to follow effectively a bell curve where most people should be in the middle, and you should have very few strong performers and hopefully very few weak performers. You can't say, everybody on my team is getting a 4, which is exceeds expectations in the hypothetical scale, right? Or a 5, where like they are outstanding and ready for promotion, and I want to promote 8 of 8. You look like you're just a real shitty manager who doesn't know what they're doing, right? If you come in with that, it screams, my expectations are too low, right? Because either one of two things happened. One, you somehow have the most incredible team ever assembled, or two, you do not have high enough expectations and your people are not actually as good as you think they are, right? That is how that request is going to be viewed from the other side of the table if I were to go in and say, I want to promote everybody, right? So it's not very clearly zero sum, right? It is very rare, I think, that a manager will be told, you can do 3 title adjustments this cycle, right? You're probably not working from a strict budget like you are on the actual comp side when it comes to promotions, but there's a ceiling, right? You may not be told what that ceiling is, but if you got a team of 8, ceiling's definitely lower than 8, right? It is, I think, very rare that any organization would allow a manager to simultaneously promote everybody on their team, right? So everybody can't get promotions. Could you do 7? Could you do 6? Maybe 5? Probably still high, right? Even 4, right? It would be weird to sit down and tell your direct supervisor that, hey, I want to promote half my team this cycle, right? Now, it's only 4 people if your group is only 8, but still, the optics are not stellar. So understand that it is a competition. You are competing with the other folks on your team, right? So using my past as an example, everybody within my SEO group was effectively competing with everybody else to see who were going to be the 2 or 3 promotions that got handed out this time, right? Because not everybody can get promoted together. So who's it going to be? It's going to be the top 2 or 3 folks, or it's going to be the folks that are just overperforming where they are now because past review cycles have ended up backing them into a corner where they're kind of undertitled already, and we really need to do something about that. But it is more clearly a competition on the comp front, right? Because in those cases, it's much more normal for it to literally be a zero-sum system, right? Where, like I explained, I'll be given a total budget. You have X dollars to distribute. That is it. That is the size of the pie. You, as the leader of the SEO team, can chop it up however you want, as long as it fairly decently tracks with how you've graded your people on the 1 to 5 scale. There's not going to be a big stink about it because you've got to deliver it, and you're the one that's going to get the complaints, and you're going to have the angry people on your team if you do a bad job of doing this. So we're going to try and make sure you're roughly in the guardrails, but more or less it's up to you as the manager. It is quite literally zero sum. Every dollar that I gave to person X is a dollar that I could not give to person Y, right? So it, isn't a system that I think anybody is in love with, right? But it is a system that operates against caps. And so when you're pushing for additional compensation, it's worth keeping in the back of your mind that anything you push for, it comes from someone else effectively, right? And some managers take a very, I'll say, Bernie Sanders approach to comp adjustments, where they'll just chop it up and do it equally. If everybody that reports to them are all on the manager level, or they'll say managers all get X and senior managers all get Y and associates get Z, right? And basically chop it up pretty equally. It tends to have a lot of moving parts, especially if you've got different pools of budget, like I said, where you have salary and bonus and then stock grants. It takes a while to try and kind of get those numbers to the point where you can look at each person on your team and feel okay about where things are at. And it's sometimes very heavily skewed by the top folks on the team, right? So if I found myself in a position where I had two really standout players on my team, and my big goal was making sure that I retain, this person and this person, because I'm going to be in trouble in terms of keeping the channel as a whole on track to its goals without these two star performers. A lot of the available comp may end up going to them, especially if things in the organization aren't going all that great and budgets are tight, right? Because if budgets are tight, that means the total pie is smaller than maybe it would have been in prior years. And now I, as a channel lead, as an example, have a more stressful job on my plate right now because I need to simultaneously keep my best people happy, but not starve everybody else and give them effectively nothing, right? So it's not a particularly fun time for managers, right? Especially if the organization more broadly is right under or right on track with goals, right? If everybody's crushing their numbers across groups and everything's going great, budgets are healthy, it can be a fine time of year. If things are tight, it can get pretty stressful. So if your manager seems stressed around review time, this might be why, right? And I think the other piece, and this is a good segue again, is it's not all about you, right? There may be things happening throughout the organization that have absolutely nothing to do with you as an individual performer, right? The SEO team could be doing great, but maybe the SEO team's only 15% of company revenue. 85 cents of every dollar comes from the people around you. And if paid search, for example, is the biggest channel and things have not been going great in paid search, that is going to have an indirect effect on every other team, right? Because organizations don't exist in these tiny marketing channel silos, right? There's a total budget, right? And then there's a total budget for marketing. And then the CMO makes the decision on how they're going to split it up between the channels generally, right? So maybe the CMO says, you know what? Paid search has really been holding us back with their performance. Their budget is just going to be tiny this year, and I'm going to overfeed the other marketing channels because it's not their fault. We're not hitting our numbers as a company, right? Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't, right? But it's not all about you, right? You obviously want to do everything that you can do. You want to perform to the best of your ability in your role. You want to make it clear that you're ready to take on more. But at the end of the day, a lot of other stuff that has very little to do with you also has to go right for you to get promoted or for you to get a significant comp adjustment, right? And the promotions, I think, are probably the harder of the two pending the organization. Again, just because you may be doing great, but if there's two other people or three other people on a not very large team that are doing even better than you're doing, and maybe it's been a while since they've gotten a promotion and they're kind of undertitled right now, your manager may be basically expending their promotional capital in other areas, and they just can't get you a title bump right now. They may have submitted it and been told no, right? And you know what managers kind of can't do is sit down in a performance review with you and say, I requested to bump your title up and it was declined, right? That's not a thing you're going to be told, right? Generally, your manager is then going to be told outright sometimes, or at the very least expected to fall on the sword, right? You are supposed to act like it was your decision. If you ask for more money for somebody or a title bump and HR or the CMO or whomever is supposed to approve it says no, you can't go into that review and then be like, man, I don't know what to tell you. I asked and, they declined, so they're screwing you, right? That's not a thing that you can do as a manager. You're expected to go in and defend the decision, even if you don't agree with it, right? So if your manager seems hesitant, if your manager doesn't seem, let's say, fully bought into the message they're delivering, around, why maybe you didn't get a title bump this time around, or why your comp adjustment isn't, what you were hoping for, it may be because they are not on board with the message that they have to deliver and are having a hard time hiding that, right? And again, pressing in that situation, probably not going to have a positive outcome, right? But try and be as perceptive as you can and figure out if that might be what's going on, right? Sometimes your manager is very clear with you and tells you you are just not meeting expectations, and there's an imbalance between how good you think you're doing and how good your manager thinks you're doing, or how far above expectations you're performing versus your manager's actual expectations and how close or far you are from there. That should all come out in the performance review process, which again can get tricky if these all happen at the same time. But hopefully, as the performance review process goes on, you get a clearer and clearer idea of how you're doing as an individual, and then everything else is, like I said, all the other stuff that has to happen. Some people call it luck, right? Refer to it as like you have to be lucky to get promoted. Maybe, right? In the sense that there's all this other stuff that has to happen that you don't actually control. Sure. But I think that is the other piece that I think as managers you are discouraged from discussing with your team, and as a result, folks early in their career tend to not have a real appreciation for. So for individual contributors and really for anyone, right? Because again, like we talked about in prior videos, everybody's got a boss, right? Everybody has goals, everybody has expectations that they're trying to hit. You need to be aware that self-assessments are ammunition, right? You are basically making your case for not only a good performance review rating, but then in effect, a comp adjustment upward and potentially a title bump, a promotion, right? If you aren't filling a self-assessment out, making a strong case for all those things to happen, you can't really expect them to happen, right? So self-assessments feel stupid. They feel really dumb. They feel awkward to fill out, right? If you're not somebody who tends to brag about themselves or their performance, you got to do it though. And you have to be very thorough. You have to track your wins throughout the year, and you have to bring all of these significant wins into that self-assessment, because that is the ammunition, that is the meat of the discussion you want to have, right? The second piece, and this is good advice broadly, and you should avoid this anyway, but it's critically important during performance review time, especially if your organization does 360s, is don't be a jerk. There are people that I have worked with who were good at their role, right, at the tactical executional function of their job, and they were very good at managing up, so their manager and leadership more broadly thought highly of them. But everybody at their level hated working with them because they were an obnoxious jerk, right? And if the organization starts doing 360s or already does 360s, that can torpedo you, right? If the feedback from everyone else at your level comes through loud and clear that your teammates hate being on the team with you because you're an obnoxious jerk, probably not going to go well in performance review time, and you're probably not going to get the promotion or the comp adjustment you want. You're probably not going to make it into a leadership role because, dear God, nobody likes working with this guy. Why would we give him his own team, right? That's unlikely to happen. The other piece you want to do during the year more broadly, but then again, really highlight this in the self-assessment going into that performance review process that immediately precedes promotions and comp adjustments. Show that you're learning. Show that you are taking the initiative. You are learning new stuff. If you're an SEO, have you set up a hobby site that you're toying with? Are you tinkering with your own projects, trying to learn stuff that you can then bring to work and improve for your actual work responsibilities? Are you the one on the team staying kind of in the loop on what's going on in the SEO industry and bringing that news back to the SEO team Slack channel, right? And sharing kind of the, burgeoning thoughts on the latest algorithm update or something like that, right? Are you that person on the team, or are you the person who just kind of sits back and lets other folks bring information in, and you're not really testing any stuff on your own? It doesn't seem like you're thinking about your role once 5 o'clock hits and you get up and leave the office or sign off of Slack in current coronavirus times. Show that you're interested in your channel and in your job outside of your exact role responsibilities. And then finally, as best you can, try and read the room, right? Again, it's not always all about you. So if you don't get that promotion or you don't get the comp adjustment that you want, it may have nothing to do with your performance, right? And you can kind of feel your way around that conversation with your manager. It depends on how close you two are, how good of a working relationship you've got. Sometimes they may come out and tell you, I tried, I'm sorry, couldn't make it happen. And sometimes they can't. And again, they have to sit down and try and defend a decision to you that they may not agree with, right? So as best you can, try and pick up what the situation may be. And hopefully you're doing that before review and promotion and comp adjustment time. Get a feel for how the organization as a whole is doing, right? Hopefully the place you work communicates stuff like that and says how the company as a whole is doing, but some places are a little weird about that. So chat with folks on other marketing teams as an example, and just kind of get a feel for like, hey, you guys hitting your goals over an email? Because we're like just squeaking by where we're supposed to be right now. How about you? And try and figure out from other folks at your level or near your level, how are the other teams doing? How are the other channels doing? Do we feel good about the fourth quarter, or is this one going to be really tight? Try to get a feel for kind of the temperature of the room going into this process so that you're not surprised or blindsided by not getting a promotion that you thought you had in the bag, or a comp adjustment that you thought your efforts more than earned on your end. So, as always, if you have any specific questions about the promotion process, the comp adjustment process, you want to trade war stories about going through this process in organizations where you've worked, if you want feedback on a self-assessment that you're about to submit, and you're a member of our Pro Accelerator, I will see you back in Slack.